Sherman. She claims that she did exchange work for all of these funds, but I'm sure it was probably not the market rate, you know? She's not independently wealthy. She flew on a private jet back to Toronto and allegedly went around telling anyone who would listen that Honey, her sister, had promised her $300 million right before she died. She also downed a ton of drinks and snapped at Jack Kay, which is one of Barry's first business partners in Apotex, and would later be the CEO of Apotex briefly, and just straight up screamed at him along with Honey's best friend since childhood, just like making a scene. But really, none of that even were compared to Carrie Winter. Carrie Winter is Barry Sherman's cousin, and he stated that the couple deserved to die. And honestly, he stated it should have been worse. Their heads should have been twisted off and kicked around like soccer balls. Carrie said Barry Sherman was a curse. Anyone who associated with him would end up with bad luck.
He cared about one thing. Money. Making lots of it. And not caring what we destroyed. We stepped on.
So why does Carrie hate Barry Sherman, his own cousin, so much? That is a billion-dollar question. Literally. Carrie sued his cousin Barry Sherman for $1 billion. Carrie and his brothers were allegedly referred to in the family as the Winter orphans because their parents, Lou and Beverly Winter, passed when they were young, and the Winter orphans consisted of adopted son Tim, and then 3 biological sons, Jeffrey, Carrie, and Dana. So Tim, Jeffrey, Carrie, Dana. They all hate Barry. The last 3 sons hate Barry the most. Tim kind of does his own thing because he's a chef, but the last 3 sons, they felt like they were all owed a piece of the pharmaceutical company Apotex, and Barry Sherman had screwed them over.
Did they explain why, how?
Oh yeah, we're gonna get into it. So Apotex is the largest pharmaceutical company in Canada and the 7th largest globally. It's founded and led by Barry Sherman. Net worths, I don't think are really ever accurate, but it's suggested that at least Barry Sherman was worth like $7 billion. And probably more. Apotex is said to sell over 300 generic drugs in more than 115 countries. They fill over 89 million prescriptions a year in Canada alone. They manufacture over 25 billion doses of drugs a year, and annual global revenues are estimated to be around $1.6 billion. And that's just half of where Barry Sherman wanted to take Apotex. His company goal that he's on track for before he passed was to reach 50 billion doses. So you're looking at, if you double that, if we just make it simple math, maybe even potentially $3 billion in revenue a year. Their HQ is in Toronto, and globally they employ around 11,000 employees. And side note about the headquarters, it feels more like the Federal Reserve. It's got higher security than Area 51 in the US. Apotex headquarters has these concrete and steel walls that are about 2 feet thick and locked behind this giant vault. At any given time, they've got nearly $1.3 billion worth of active pharmaceutical ingredients waiting to be made into coveted painkillers. Entry into the vault is granted by a fingerprint lock that only 2 people can open. We have no idea who these 2 people are. And by the way, the door itself into the vault weighs 1,000 pounds. Yeah. Side note, Sherman did step down as CEO in 2014, but he's heavily involved. He's still the chairman. He really was a tank in the pharmaceutical industry, Barry Sherman. People said that he's like a real-life human scanner. He's got a photographic memory, and if you give him like a 100-page intense legal document, high stakes, incredible, all the legal jargon, 100 pages, he would sit there and he would have it so close to his face, like a human scanner, like a robot, scanning each page, taking 0 notes, put it down, and he'd say, looks good, but there's a typo on page 42. And sure enough, there was. He also had some sheer confidence backing him up. One time his business partner asked him, why do you think we're going to be successful when others have failed? And he responded, because I'm smarter than everyone else. But just because your cousin creates a billion-dollar company, does that make you entitled to a piece? This one is tricky. It's complicated. And it goes all the way back to Barry's childhood. Before being a billionaire, it was just Butterball Barry. That was his nickname. In school, he was described as a butterball and sluggish. He was very lethargic. He seemed perpetually sleepy. He was physically awkward, introverted, unless you talk about God. Yeah. Over the years, if someone said, thank God, in front of Barry, he would say, there is no God. dad went to work, never came back home. He had a heart attack and died. Barry learned that his dad had been hiding a congenital heart defect and did not tell anyone in the family. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody. And now Barry's mom had to raise all of her kids on her own, and it was tough. Barry started college at 16 at the University of Toronto, then went on to get a PhD in astrophysics from MIT. At MIT, he had a 5.0 GPA, and his whole life goal was to work at NASA one day. I mean, just to give you an idea of how smart this guy was, his thesis at MIT was called Precision Gravity Gradient Satellite Altitude Control. I don't even know what that means. And he eventually received a patent from the US government for his thesis. During the summers, he didn't want to just sit around, so he looked for anything that could gain experience. And it was kind of perfect because his uncle, Uncle Lou Winter, Carrie's father, owned a generic drug company called Empire Labs. Empire Labs at the time focused on running pregnancy tests. So I'm gonna take it way back then. So you know how these days you can pee on a stick at home and it tells you if you're pregnant or not, right? Back in the day, they didn't have that. So you would have to go to a doctor's office, pee in a cup, they would send it to a diagnostics lab like Empire Labs, and then they would run the test through these crazy machines and tech that they have, then tell the doctor the results. So he was basically a urine delivery boy, if I'm putting it nicely. He would just deliver urine. But he quickly works up, even under Uncle Lou, who is known to be a crazy temperamental boss, he would get red in the face and scream at anyone that did something that he didn't like or didn't think that he was smart enough. So Barry's getting very fascinated working under Uncle Lou. He's like, look, the pharmaceutical industry, he's learning a lot. And he's probably learning a lot about how much money there is to be made. And then tragedy struck again. So Beverly is Uncle Lou's wife. This is Barry's maternal aunt. She's diagnosed with leukemia, and things are not looking great. So when Barry gets an urgent call from his sister about the Winters, he's assuming, oh my god, Aunt Beverly died. And his sister said, no, it's Uncle Lou. Uncle Lou passed away. He had an aneurysm in his brain that burst. He was dead. And then a few months later, Beverly passed away. And now the Winters, the four cousins, they were orphans technically. All they had were Empire Labs, but they were young. Like, I think the oldest was 7 years old at the time. Barry was 23. So the four Winter orphans, and that's how the family referred to them, allegedly, not me, they were adopted by a local couple that happened to be doctors. But Carrie would claim that these adoptive parents were very abusive. And the whole point of Empire Labs was a board of trustees would take over. They would grow it, maintain it until the Winter kids were of age, and then either it would be sold and they would get the profits, or the Winter kids would take over once they were age. Because, you know, what can a 7-year-old do? Then they didn't want to just shut down Empire Labs, right? It was handed over to a board who appointed a new CEO. And Barry saw this, and they saw them destroying his uncle's company. So Barry and his best friend Joel, they take loans from their parents, basically their parents' life savings, beg the board to let them buy Empire Labs before they run it to the ground. And it took 2 years for them to convince Empire Labs, the board, to be sold to Barry and Joel. So they finally own Empire Labs, and they know that a big portion of this
Wala.
by the Winter kids. So
Kasi talaga mo ang
Winter
mga
kids legally own 20%.
Hindi ko lang bakit.
Di ba mared?
Barry owns
Hindi.
5% each. So the first day in office, Barry told his best friend from high school, his business partner,